We're going to conclude our week in the Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast by looking at chapter 30 of Genesis, and the story of Jacob goes on. And as often happens in these Old Testament narratives, we find a lot of years and a lot of stuff happening in a very short period of time. Chapter 30 is one of those chapters. Just so much is packed as far as time is concerned, and things that happen in this chapter. It's just kind of amazing. But we come to chapter 30, verse 1, and we find as Leah has now have 4 sons, Rachel has none, and she is very upset. Verse 1, it says, she became jealous for her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or I die." Well, Jacob doesn't bite, and he gets pretty upset himself. Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" He said, "I can't do anything about this. I mean, God is the one who's responsible for you not being able to have children." So much like Sarah did earlier, Rachel comes up with a plan B, and she's going to give her maid to Jacob as a wife, so that maybe she can have children through the maid. And so she does in verse 3. Bilhah is going to do that. It becomes a kind of a secondary kind of wife for Jacob. And she does produce children. She has a son in verse 6 by the name of Dan, and another son in verse 8 by the name of Naphtali. And this seems to be satisfying for a moment or two. But now notice these particular brothers are not big players in the redemptive scheme of the Old Testament and going even into the New Testament connotations, like the sons of Leah were. But they were part of the 12 tribes of Israel. But Leah saw what's going on, and she wants to get in on this game too. So she takes her maid, verse 9, Zilpah, and gives her as a wife, because she wasn't able to have more children. So maybe she could have some children through her maid, who would also be kind of a secondary wife. And it works. In verse 11, she has a son named Gad. I like that name. And in verse 13, Asher. So we're mounting up on these children now at this time. Then a little later on, Rachel's still unable to have her own children. Sees Reuben coming in with some mandrakes, and the superstition of the time was these kind of vegetations would somehow produce fertility, and so she offers to buy the mandrakes from Leah and her son. By buying, she meant she was going to let her husband Jacob spend some nights with Leah in order to perhaps eventually have children of her own. And so all that was actually happened there is that Leah did spend time with Jacob and produce some more children. So we find that in verse 18 she has a son named Issachar. Verse 20 she has one named Zebulun, and then she also has a daughter named Diane. Now there might have been other girls born to these unions, but Diane will play a very significant role in the story a little later. So that's why I think she's mentioned here, but we'll come to that in due time. In verse 22, the Lord finally, it says, remembers Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. So finally the Lord is blessing her with a child, and she has none other than Joseph, who we will see plays a very important role in the history of Israel and the patriarchs as he moves off to Egypt eventually. He will be the favorite son of Jacob and his mother as we move on. But Rachel then in verse 25 says, then that now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place in my own country." So now Jacob is tired of working for Laban. He wants to leave. He's become very wealthy and is going to become more wealthier. But Laban doesn't want to lose him because he knows God has blessed him because of Jacob. So he says, name your wages, verse 28, and I'll pay you. Well, so he comes up with a deal, and Jacob begins to take off certain of the flock for his own. So verse 35, he took the striped and the spotted male goats and the speckled and spotted female goats, and everyone with white in it, and all the black ones were among the sheep, and gave them to his sons to care for them. Now, in other words, he's taking what is usually considered the inferior flock. for his own, and they would also be able to distinguish between the others. He takes them, and then later on, as we finish out the chapter, we won't read all this, we find Jacob is coming up with some schemes once again to try to get more flock, take over more of Laban's herds and flocks. And so he does that. Once again, we find Jacob really hasn't changed much. He is still a deceiver. Why these tricks worked, I don't know, but I do know Jacob's intent was to take Laban's stuff, and he deceives Laban as best he can. So he has not changed much at all. He's going to head back home now, but his character isn't much changed, and the family still is struggling in many, many deep ways. Well, we'll pick up the rest of Jacob's life here next week, starting with chapter 31. If you're behind in your reading, good opportunity to catch up, and we'll see you next week. God's blessings upon you.